This is Avram's Bakery by Fine Scale Miniatures. This is Jewel Series Kit number 10. It was released in November of 2007. One of 700 that was released. Most of the Jewel Series kits were released apparently in quantities of 600, but this one was 700. And it retailed for $280 when it was released. Fine Scale Miniatures is the company founded by George Celios. He retired in 2016. You can still get these kits on the internet, on eBay. This is my second Fine Scale Miniatures Jewel Series kit. If you would like a little more on the background of the company, check out the first one. That was the Hazen Boyd kit. So let's see what's in the box. These are my wall pieces. I've braced them on the inside, and on the outside I sprayed them with a gray enamel primer, and this is going to be the base coat for the paint. I'm going to do something different than what I normally do for these builds. I'm going to more closely follow his instructions for his paint techniques on this particular building. The next step, according to George, is to take a Q-tip and dip it in some isopropyl alcohol. This is 91% isopropyl alcohol. And then rub it on the boards to remove the acrylic paint and reveal the gray paint below it. And the purpose of this is to make it look somewhat faded. So I tried this a couple times here. I don't think it looks all that good. I'm doing it in some spots that aren't very visible right now. So I'm not entirely sure how he did that. This is why the underlying primer coat was gray, was you're supposed to reveal the gray color beneath it. The next thing to do is apply the sign, and he gives you two versions of the sign. There's a regular one and a faded one, and he did that with other signs as well, so that's kind of nice. So to apply the sign, you just cover the back with white glue, and you really want to be careful not to get any on the front. As you smear it. Then make sure you have it right side up on the wall. And I think this is about how he has it. And then use a wooden toothpick to burnish it in there. If you use metal, you'll scrape the ink off the sign. So you have to be careful about that. I found a wood toothpick works really well. So now what I'm going to do is I have some folk art barnwood, and I'm going to apply it with a sponge pretty lightly around the building because it's not supposed to look all that weathered. It's time to do some weathering on the building, and I'm going to use a wash of traditional burnt umber, which is the brown, and barnwood, which is this gray color, and mostly use the brown. For this sign, I sprayed it with acrylic sealer so that the water does not impact the paper. On this side, I did a little bit of testing, and where I had rubbed off with the cotton swab, it kind of left bits of cotton behind, and when I put the wash on, it picked up those pieces of cotton. So you have to be really careful about rubbing the building with anything that leaves back traces. And that's why I commonly use these makeup sponges, because they don't seem to do that. was going to film painting the corrugated metal, but I was kind of experimenting with some techniques and just brushing on some different rust colors. And just in playing with it, it ended up being finished without recording any of it. But really all I did was brush on some different rust colors and used a sponge for some of this darker red, like on this one. So kind of sponged it on. So it's just a matter of playing around with different colors until you get something that you like. And then there'll be more color added once it's on the building, because I'll have to touch up the edges. I'm working on the assembly of the trackside support wall, and I think the easiest thing to do is use a little bit of blue tack and glue the main piece to the cardstock, and then carefully glue on the additional pieces. I'm going to use a very small amount of glue to be careful not to glue this assembly to the paper. And then I use 1, 2, 3 blocks to hold it in place while the glue sets. These are my various sub-assemblies, the 2 loading docks and the various supports and the water tank. The builds were not very exciting, but the first thing I'm going to do is spray them with a gray enamel. My attempt to clamp on the porch roof. There wasn't really an easy way to do this, and it's kind of hard to see whether I got it clamped in the right spot or not. So I'm just going to have to hope and that it is going to work out correctly. This is my water tank, and I'm going to try this AK Interactive Puddles to fill up the top of the water tank. And this is an acrylic product, and it says that you can use this up to 3 millimeters. If you want to do more than 3 millimeters, you have to do layers. So I did do a test piece, and I had some trouble with some bubbles, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem here. It's been several hours and the puddle's not dry yet, so I'm not sure how long it takes. It picked up some dust, but that's my fault. I should have covered it. And you can still see the wood grain on the dowel underneath the puddle. I should have done some sanding on the dowel before I assembled the tank, but it's not going to be very visible looking into the tank, so it's not really a big deal. And I thought about putting some leaves or debris or something on the surface of this anyway. This is the support for the trackside portion of the building. The base is wood, but it's supposed to represent concrete. And so as an experiment, I covered it with this AK Interactive concrete. But it was really too coarse for HO scale. This is more for like 1/35 scale or larger. So I sanded it down with an emery board. And this is the result. So I'm not sure that it's appropriate for this scale. I don't know, maybe I'll find a use for it somewhere. Here's the building after applying the weathering powders and spraying it with, to me, a flat clear. On the roof, I actually used 2 coats of weathering powders and still didn't really give a very good weathered appearance. The flat clear just took away all the appearance of the weathering powders on the roof. I didn't do so much with the walls. The walls are still pretty weathered from the powders. although it did make them a little more subtle. But I like the look. So now that I've sprayed the Tamiya Flat Clear all over the building, the next thing I'm going to do is start putting in the window panes. And for that, I'm just using the clear acetate. And I usually just glue it in with this Tester's window cement, because the Tester's window cement does a good job of bonding plastic to wood. For the main building, I just cut out little pieces of this tan construction paper and I put them in the windows to represent the lines. For the cafe, I put curtains in the windows. I found pictures of curtains online and just printed out different sizes, cut them out and glued them in. And then for the interior walls, I just blacked everything out. I've been working on the various sub-assemblies, and most of them are not very interesting to watch the build. But the water tank might be interesting, and it looks like something you could build on your own without the kit. So the starting point is this dowel. He gives you the pre-cut staves. And the first thing you do is use a builder square, and you mark vertical lines on the dowel. And these are just to make sure that you put the staves on vertically. I don't think they have to be spaced any particular way. They're just guidelines to keep the wood strips vertical. You'll notice that the staves are taller than the water tower, and his concept is that there's still water in the water tower, so the top of the water we're going to paint and make it look like water. So he actually recommends that you paint the top first. I'm going to come back to that. And then when you put on the staves, just start with one. And get it into position correctly and let it dry so that the rest of them will be properly oriented to it. I came up 2 staves short for wrapping the circumference, and so I just had to use a couple other pieces of wood from the kit. So we'll just put that in against the building and it won't be obvious. The next step, he says, is to cut 7 5.5-inch pieces of thread. This is the thread he gives you with the kit. This is the template for spacing the bands on the tank, and he says to cut it out. And here it is against the ruler in case you want to make your own. I just figured it'd be easier to do it in metric. Here's where it seems like it might get a little challenging. He says to take a pin vise and drill a hole at each of the points where the thread is going to go around. And you kind of do it up the side. And this side, where you drill the holes, is going to go against the building so it won't be visible. But you're supposed to put the thread in the hole and then glue it into the hole and then wrap the thread around the tank. The interesting part of this is I don't know what order you're watching the videos in, but the last video that I did was Muldoon's Distillery, which also had a tank. And what he did is he had pins go in each of these locations, and the pin had a head that stuck out a little bit. And what you did is you took the thread and you wrapped it around the tank and then around the pin and then up to the next pin, around the tank, around the pin, and up to the next pin. So it was one continuous piece of thread all the way up and around the pins. And then there is a channel that covers the pins so you can't see it. It's basically a rectangular box that goes all the way down the tank. So that was their approach to this. That seems like it was probably easier than this. He says to stick it in the hole and let it dry. Actually, that went in pretty easily. So the next thing to do is let that dry and then wrap it around the tank.